They have these wonderful big, rich green paddle-like leaves that rocket out of the ground to about 8 or 9 feet, and then these pendulous pink flowers, rich pink, that dangle and you can look up into. I went to horticultural college because I really didn't know what to do with myself. And my nan said, well, you love being outdoors. Why not, go and study horticulture? And when years later I said to her, why did you push me into becoming a gardener? She said, well, you just had so much energy, son. I just wanted to keep you out of prison.
Hello and welcome to episode 70 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking quite autumnal in his brown jumper, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
In Cambridgeshire, looking kind of rosy this morning. We have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredriksson, ebullient as ever.
I thought I'd go a little early for Christmas, so I brought out a jumper with a border terrier wearing a Christmas hat. So a little nod to the festive season, which is nearly upon us. And I suppose actually someone whose Instagram feed is quite often full of Christmas inspiration, as well as lots of gardening inspiration, is the frustrated gardener, Dan Cooper, back by popular demand. How the devil are you?
I'm so well, thank you very much. And do you know, if I'd known you were going to wear the Christmas jumper, I was going to put a Christmas tree up, actually, where the lemur is behind me. And I thought, no, I can't do that because there'll be a pole that is in my office. So
hang on, you have a lot of Christmas trees, though. How many do you put up in the end?
That will be number 10, because that will be a new one. I haven't got any Christmas trees up yet, though, so I'm being very good.
When you say 10, we're not talking like 10 tiny Christmas trees.
No.
Like you go big with Christmas trees.
Yes, 6 foot is the smallest, and they're all sort of 6 or 7 or 8.
I am kind of surprised you have time in your life to do 10 Christmas trees, or a Christmas tree really, because it must be all stations go, like absolutely non-stop, getting ready for a very exciting venture which is launching next spring. You've just started talking about it on your social media, so I think we can open the floodgates and fully announce what's coming up from you.
Well, that's very kind of you. Yes, no, I have finally broken free from John Lewis, where I've worked for nearly 26 years now. It's the longest temp job I've ever had. I sort of went there meaning to stay for 6 months and ended there for nearly 26 years. So yes, I am going to start an online business, and I'm going to be trying to bring together like the very best gardening products that there are out there and accompany them with lots of really great advice and inspiration. Because I think the problem we all have is that we all have a lot of stuff. We all want someone to do the hard work and the editing for us. So I'm going to try and do that by finding the best things that there are out there and then making lots of fabulous content to help people use them and get the most out of them. So that's the plan.
That is so exciting, because Graham has been looking for, I think he's found one now, sorry, but he was looking for a sizable tool carrier. I mean, gardening hand tools, but something that, you can get a sort of a metre long fork in. He was using an old log carrier to actually cart his tools around in. Yeah. So, it's quite important to do the editing bit, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, we don't need more stuff, do we? We just need the right stuff. And I think there are lots of places that shall remain nameless where you can get just about anything in the world if you look hard enough.
Tell you what I always say, Dan, they sell everything you didn't know you couldn't live without.
Exactly. So I want to be the absolute opposite of that and just really try and take the hard work out of it for people and demystify lots of things about gardens and gardening, really, because I think a lot of people find it difficult to, take their first steps into gardening because it's such a labyrinthine subject, isn't it? And it's overwhelming, I think, for people who
What is the title of your business?
It's called Dan Cooper Garden. It's so inventive, Alan. But
no, it's good. That's good. It's simple and to the point.
A marketing person said, people spend way too long sweating over names, and then they come up with something completely contrived and ridiculous, and you may as well just say what it is on the tin. So
yes.
I think that's about as plain
I
as
agree. No, I do agree there.
Yeah, because the other option is you spend your life wishing you did a gardening program called Talking Dirty, and then so call your podcast Talking Dirty, and then when everyone tries to find it, they end up stuck with porn. So that's the other option. The Dan Cooper Garden, probably wise.
Yes, well, hopefully there's nothing too much that can go wrong with that. But of course, these days it's, you can't just come up with a name for something. You've got to check that you can get the Instagram account and the Facebook account and the .com and the .co.uk. And it's, and it's easy if you go for your own name, because the likelihood is no one's sort of snapped that up already.
Yeah.
But so hopefully it will launch in the spring. So I'm going for sort of late February-ish for a sort of soft launch, and then properly in April. So there will not be a dull moment this winter, I can tell you.
This is why, incidentally, for anyone who watches all the video versions of the podcast, we're used to seeing Dan in your wonderful garden room with the plants sort of crowding in like they're going to take over the screen by the end of the video. But A, because it's quite full and probably quite, maybe not quite so suitable, but also because this is your office now. This is the heart of your empire.
It is, yes. I mean, it is actually quite nice. So this room is a sort of spare room, excess room in the house. It's right at the very top. So I get to not only look at your lovely face, but just the other side of the computer screen is the sea. So I've got my binoculars just over there, and if I get bored, I can sort of see what's going on in the English Channel. There's lots of people been fishing the last few weeks because it's been so calm here. I don't know what it's been like in Norfolk, but the sea has been flat calm a lot of the time, apart from the odd day. So
I think we're a little bit choppier than that.
I think it's
we don't get many days with flat calm here.
You still talking about the sea, Alan?
Yes.
And I should say, before we stop talking about your exciting business, Dan, you've really got some great people involved, because like you said, it's not just about coming up with a name, it's about all of the stuff that goes behind it, like the branding and some very top-notch photography.
Yes, aren't I lucky? I mean, I think we all realise, don't we, that it pays to be nice to people in life, and never do you learn that more than when you start to do something different, or you take the plunge and you realise that by being a good person, or as good as you can, that people will then do things to help you. And I've been really very overwhelmed by all of that over the last few months, because I don't intentionally do it, but I've always tried to sort of do the best by people, and then they pay that back. So it's just been really lovely that lots of people have wanted to support what I'm doing, and I just got very lucky with Marian, I have to say, because I dropped her a line just before the Chelsea Flower Show, and I realised at that point that I was going to try creating this business in the middle of winter. And at some point, I was going to turn around and go, oh, I need some photographs. So I dropped Marian a line because she's photographed the garden a few times over the years. She first photographed it the year it was sort of constructed, and it's virtually unrecognisable from that now. And she said, oh, that's good, because I'm at Chelsea, I'm driving back to Luxembourg, where Marian lives now, and I can stop off with you on the way home. So useful being near Dover, useful that I had the wheeze, just around the time she was over for Chelsea. And yeah, she took some absolutely stunning photographs, and a lot of them as well. So you will be spammed with more of Marian's marvelous images over the next few months. But yeah, she's very, very talented, and I'm very lucky to count her as a friend.
Oh, that's wonderful. The photos, we've only seen a couple so far, but they look fabulous. And of course, the wonderful thing about this business is you can bring all of your lifetime's worth of gardening knowledge and all of the time you've spent honing your writing skills on Frustrated Gardener, which it's worth saying will be continuing that blog. I don't know how you find the time for all these things, Dan. And you can bring it all together with Dan Cooper Garden and share the love of plants, which we're going to delve into with your show and tell.
Yes, are you ready for that?
I don't know. Are we ever ready?
Now, what shall I start? What shall I start with? Because I've got a few just sort of interesting flowers, and then I've got a sort of series of evergreen plants that I think are really good for coastal gardens and small gardens, because Alan knows this better than anybody on this call, but structure is all important, particularly during the winter, and a garden without that will look very drab and messy in the winter months. So even in a tiny garden, it's quite important to have evergreens to give you a bit of structure and a bit of colour and something, so when plants come up in the spring, there's something that they can sit against and look beautiful. So where shall I go first?
What do you fancy, Alan?
I rather fancied the sound of the Dahlia that he tempted us
with. Okay. So,
at the very beginning.
So, species dahlias, which we talked about a little bit when we did the Dahlia episode. The big tree dahlias, Alan knows, flower very, very late in the season, and it's kind of always a bit iffy whether they flower or not. We've got some absolute whoppers up at the allotment, and they have just this week started to flower, and they are covered in buds. So I'm really hoping that this weekend isn't sub-zero, because otherwise we're never going to get to see those, but they are cracking. The one that I didn't get to show you last time was Dahlia tampaulipana, which is a Nick Mesa introduction from about 10 years ago. And I first saw this actually in the Salutation with Steve, growing to some phenomenal height, something like 15 foot. And the big difference with tampaulipana is that it has very, very dark green foliage, quite unusual sort of shape, which I'm going to show you, and also that it's extremely hardy. So I think that it doesn't need to be lifted and brought in. I think it can just stay outside. So luckily enough, I've got this growing in a pot, which I wouldn't really suggest is probably how it ought to be grown. But it doesn't get so big, but it needs a lot of watering. So here we are. So here is Dahlia tampaulipana. This is pretty typical, isn't it, Alan, of a species dahlia flower. They're all pinkish and small, but you have to imagine this plant is even in a pot is 9 foot tall, and if you had it in the garden, be about 15 foot. But you can see, I think, that the foliage is a little bit different. And when these are obviously the leaves on the flowering stems, but when they are lower down the plant, they're much sort of denser and darker and more ferny. But it's a really lovely thing, and I'm hoping that it gets through the weekend, because there are a few more flowers to come on that.
Well, you've actually just struck a chord with me, because I've got exactly that flower and a very similar leaf on a dahlia in a pot in my greenhouse, and it's just opened about 2 weeks ago. And I don't know the name of it, and I don't know where I got it from. I mean, it's lost in the midst of time. But mine, it can't be the same, because it's nowhere near as big as that. It's only about 6 feet, but it could be, I suppose.
It could be. I suppose it just depends. I find when they're in a pot, it very much depends how much you feed and water them, how big they get.
Yeah.
This is really needy in a pot, because they need a lot of water really, and pot's not ideal. So I have to water this at least every other day in the summer, otherwise it doesn't sort of get moving. But of course it's easier then in the winter to move it somewhere if you want to. But I think this one is pretty hardy, but you can, I mean, even the leaves on the flowering stalk, there's a good 2.5 foot from one side to the other, and when it's growing really big, that would be 6 foot, span you're getting there. So quite an interesting stem profile as well. So it's quite fluted, unlike the sort of smooth stems of Imperialis.
Yeah. So
a little bit different, but that's nice, and I just feel very lucky to have got some flowers. Everything that's flowering in the garden at this time is a treasure, isn't it? So
yes.
So now I've got a couple of salvias. Now this one is an absolute brute. So this is Salvia Mexicana, and it has forced its way through the roof of our greenhouse. So it's literally pushed a pane of glass out and gone up through it. So it's 10 foot tall now and absolutely covered in these spikes of flowers. So I'm hopeful that actually these will be okay, because the plant itself is in the greenhouse and hopefully that's getting a little bit of warmth from there. There is a variety of this called Limelight, I think, which has much brighter yellow-green bracts in the middle, and that looks like it's worth finding, but it is an absolutely huge salvia. So I think it'd probably be, a good one for a cold greenhouse or a very sheltered spot in the garden with quite a lot of staking, I should think. Have you come across that one, Alan?
No, I haven't. I've made a note though, because I think it looks lovely. There are quite a few salvias that do reach those kind of proportions, actually. I've got Salvia concolor in the garden, which is blue flowers, and that's as hardy as old boots. But I mean, do you know the hardiness of this one?
I don't, but it's always been in an unheated greenhouse. I put it did stand outside and looked a little bit jaded last November, so I kind of put it back in again. I mean, it's very common in Mexico, but I imagine it is probably a little bit on the tender side here.
Yeah. But it's nice to have those plants, but any plant that flowers, I mean, I said on the previous podcast that what I'd really like to do, whether I'll ever be able to do it or not, I don't know. But what I'd really like to do is build a big enough structure that I can call a winter garden, which is covered.
Yeah.
And I just think, for all the late flowering plants and the winter flowering salvias that just need just that little bit extra protection from frost, be well worthwhile.
I'm totally with you on that, and I would be the same, because interestingly, I think a lot of the Impatiens, which I love, they're not really that bothered about heat, but they just do not like being buffeted about by the wind. They just to be perfect and just see their sort of flowering cycle through, they just need a little bit longer. I've got Impatiens balansae, I think it is, outside, which has these incredible flowers that look a little bit like tropical fish with great big lips. And that's one of those Impatiens that, if you had such a structure, that would go right the way through looking beautiful. As it is, it's sort of like borderline outside. It's totally hardy. So I left it outside in a pot last year and it got snow and everything on it and it came back. But it's just not as beautiful as it would be if it had been...
just that big protection.
So that would be the dream, wouldn't it? Just that little bit of shelter and cover to keep them going.
Yeah. We often hear about Alan and Graham having these sort of heated debates in the garden. I wonder if anyone will hear any about this winter garden.
Probably. Watch this space.
So, Dan, that was a very exciting plume of a salvia. What was your other salvia?
Well, this one is a lot more common, obviously. This is Salvia involucrata Bethellii, but nevertheless, I think it has a very long flowering season. So Mexicana's only just started flowering. This has been flowering for months already. And I'm quite mean to this. I don't mollycoddle it very much. What I love is the colour of the flowers, because they are very good against for example, other salvias like Amistad, they work quite well with the sort of fuchsia and the dark blue, and they're really good with autumn colours. So if you get a bright yellow or an orange somewhere with that. So this is growing in front of a lot of gingers, which I can sort of show you a bit of ginger now, because that was my next thing. But you know, when you get everything's getting caught up now. I know what I'm doing when I'm talking to you now. I've even got like a mat down on the floor for all the water that's going to drip around all over the place. But when you get the sort of berries on the gingers, and then you can put the pink next to it, it's quite a nice shock of colour, isn't it? The only drawback with this is that it is the most annoyingly brittle plant alive. So bits of it snap off constantly, so not something to grow in a windy spot, because it will just or indeed where you brush past it a lot, because I'm always snapping bits off by accident in my garden. But it's a great one, and when it's grown well, and Steve, who you spoke to last week, is someone who grows this really well in his own garden. It's a really quite beautiful sort of shrubby plant.
I think it's one of those plants that has such proportions that it almost looks, when it's well grown, it looks more like a shrub than an herbaceous perennial, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and it's very nice. And anything that really sees you through till November or December is priceless, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that would look rather nice next to my purple cotinus when it starts to get all the red and pink splotches on the leaves, and then that pink salvia. Feeling inspired. And
then I've got this beast. So I don't know why, but it's been a very good year this year for gingers setting fruit and seed. So I usually get some, and some varieties are better than others at doing this. But this year has been absolutely terrific. This is Helen Dillon, which is basically the cultivated form of Hedychium forestii. Very, very gorgeous. White flowers with bright orange anthers that come out probably August time. It's one of the earlier ones to flower. And then right now you get a lot of generosity from gingers, actually. I think people think that they're very, that they're not long in flower. But of course, you've got the wonderful foliage. They go the most marvelous colours in autumn. They will go right through to like buttery orange yellow at the very end before they decide to fall apart. But I really love these berries that they get. They're very, very bright. And if you're wanting to multiply gingers, then within these sort of fleshy red parts, there are seeds which are pretty easy to extract. And we find that they if we don't sort of take them off, they will fall onto the surface grit of pots, and then the following year you'll find them coming up everywhere. So they're not difficult to grow from seed. I don't know what would happen with this one, whether you would get true seedlings, but certainly with yunnanense, which is the one that I grow quite a bit of, they definitely do come up true from seed. But I think they're very striking, the seed heads. I think it's valuable to leave them on and get them to that stage. There is another ginger called Hedychium greenii, which right at the end of these stems actually creates little baby plants that you can snap off. So you get little bulbils. They're not bulbils, but they're rhizomes, but you get a little baby plant that comes from this end. And yes, you can just take them off, pop them in some compost, and they grow away nicely.
How wonderful. The leaf colour as well is just fantastic, isn't it?
Yes, and when you get a big clump of them, they look like sort of parrot feathers. They look very exotic. Then I can start to sort of segue, I guess, into some of the greenery. But I wanted to just, there's a couple of things I thought were nice to show you. This is Anisodontia Capensis El Rayo or El Royo. It depends which website you look at, how it's spelled. But this is a plant that never ever doesn't have a flower on it. So literally 365 days of the year, this little mallow relative will have a flower on it. So, you know, I know they are a rare and precious thing, plants that flower all year round, and that is one of them. So well worth tracking that down. It does need a bit of a trim, otherwise it becomes quite a big, tall, leggy thing, but brilliant. I mean, on Christmas Day, still be covered in flowers. So I like that. And then one other little flowering gem is Correa, Marian's Marvel. The Victorians thought that Correas were conservatory plants. They grew them indoors. They probably are in colder areas, but this one stays outside all the time for me. Starts producing these little shaded bells. I don't know how well
that's great.
Starts producing those in October, and it will finish around April. But it just continually producing those, probably with a peak sort of in early spring. But I love the colour. It's Australian. It's an Australian shrub. And I've also just managed to find a variegated one with a sort of richer pink flower, which is sort of quite low growing and in a pot outside.
Oh. You have some of these outside, don't you, Alan?
Yes, I've got that one in particular. It grows outside in the kitchen courtyard, and it grows on one of the walls of the tea room as well. And it does astonish people because that starts to flower before we close the garden. We close the garden at the end of October, and visitors are always fascinated by these lovely little sort of primrose and pink bells that you just saw. They're lovely things.
Yes, it's a great plant. The only thing you do have to be careful not to overwater it. I have killed one once by letting it be too damp. So I think it's, you know, you just have to get into your head that it's Australian, and therefore it probably is used to a bit more drought than it gets here, and then it will be happy and grow nicely. And it's interesting that you've got it against a wall, because it's quite it can be quite sort of willowy, can't it?
Yeah.
So I think a wall would suit it really well.
Yeah.
Talking of A, killing things, and B, things with really interesting flowers, when we last spoke, you assured me my Tropiolone Pentaphylum would return because they can be quite enthusiastic. And sure enough, I eventually brought it inside. There are lots of things on bathroom windowsills in my house, and it's now rampaging. It's trying to take over my bathroom, I think. So you were right. It did come back. When it first came back, it's like an alien.
Yes.
I thought these sort of weird, very keen stems that suddenly shoot up, and you can't, I mean, I obviously knew what it was because I knew what was in the pot, but it was like some sort of strange alien was about to invade my bathroom.
You just reminded me of something, because I was walking along the front of the house the other day, and I looked down, and there are some tubers from Tropiolone Pentaphylum on the surface of the soil. They look a bit like small ridgy melons, about the size of a goose egg, I suppose. And I've just reminded me I've got to cover those up. Note to self.
Set an alarm. Don't forget to protect I mean, they are absolutely wonderful flowers. If you don't know them for some reason, they're just extraordinary. But yes, you were right, Dan. It was not to be thwarted by whatever. I think it was slugs that sort of ate it down, but it's come back, so I'm very happy.
Yeah, they're persistent things, and of course they've got that tuber, haven't they, which allows them to sort of withstand, adversity. There's lots of times when I've sort of ripped it out of the greenhouse and thought, well, that's probably, I've probably gone too far this time, but no, always comes back. So that's good news. And I mean, actually not dissimilar flower colour to that Correa, really. You've got that sort of green and salmon coral sort of combination.
Yeah, with a bit of speckling.
Right, I better get some evergreens out now. So I'm going to start off with some ferns, because dry shade, quite dark spots, that's a problem for a lot of people. And I've got a few things that I find brilliant. And the first one is this is Cyrtomium falcatum, So you can, I bet you can see how glossy that is.
Wow.
Glossy here. So this is, I think, Japanese holly fern. You can see how long that leaf is. They can grow to about 3 foot, I guess. But I am so mean to this. It grows in the most unpromising spot, quite dark, deep shade, very, very little water, and it still manages to produce these leaves on a regular basis. It never ever gets that sort of dull sheen that but some plants do when they're not in their ideal conditions. So it's a really fantastic fern for a very difficult spot. And actually, if you're into flower arranging and things like that, it's quite a useful fern to have around, because you can always guarantee you're going to get these leaves. Have you tried this one? Anyone tried this one?
I haven't, no.
I'm desperate to. That I know exactly where I want to put that in my garden.
Yeah, I mean, once it gets going, it doesn't produce lots and lots of leaves every year. So if you're shopping for these, get a decent sized plant, because it doesn't grow fast, but and I dare say if it was happier than I make it, it would do a lot better. So that's a good one. This one is Polystichum unitum, which I first came across this looking fabulous at Castle Drogo, I think. If you're familiar with that garden, they've got these pavilions at the corner of this square space. It's probably got a name, and they are covered in some sort of climber. So the bed underneath is completely in the dark. And I think 2 of the beds have got azarum in, and the other 2 beds have got this in. But it's a bit like an outdoor Boston fern. It's got that sort of look about it. It grows brilliantly in a pot. And it is evergreen, but it looks very fresh all the time. So I think that's a cracking fern. And again, you can be pretty mean to that. So I think anything that you can be mean to is useful, particularly when you're growing lots of needy plants like dahlias. You need the rest to get on with it themselves. And then this one is one of the plants I must have grown for the longest in my life. It is dripping everywhere, which is Polystichum setiferum herrenhausen. So this is a very low growing feathery fern. I don't know if you can see all these little plantlets or little sprigs coming off all over it here. I just got this one from quite low down in the plant. But it's very, very pretty. This is semi-evergreen, so the leaves will go right the way through the winter, and then it's a good idea to chop them off just before the new ones come through. Otherwise you'd get these go brown, and then it's a bit difficult to pull them out separately. But it's like a little forest on its own, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a lovely thing, very good for ground cover. I've got water running right down my arms now. Once I've done this, when we're on episode 200 and something, I'll have worked out how not to get soaked with water when I do it.
I feel like we're really fortunate that we just sit and enjoy the plants, and anyone who's doing the show and tell, they end up. It's like if you host a party and everyone leaves having had a good time, and you're left with a cleanup operation. We go away and you end up with plants all over your house, water dripping down your arm, puddles everywhere.
No, it's fun, seriously. And they will all. I'll do something with all of those later and keep them. So those are a few sort of good evergreen ground covery things. I'd say pots for any of those, and probably the Cyrtomium is a little bit on the tender side, but the rest should be fine. So then I've got some trees. So again, when people visit the garden, I get asked a lot about what are the trees. So I've got the bits of the 3 main ones, but it's because I think for small gardens, people are obviously wary of planting something that's going to get very large. And also where I live is by the coast. The winds can be quite cold, and trees also you know, you might be planting them somewhere where there's not a lot of root space for them. So some trees are a little bit adventurous, as we all know, when it comes to their roots, but others are not. And the absolute epitome of ones that are not are the pseudopanax. So I just found out this morning, actually, whilst I was making sure I got the name of this right. This is Pseudopanax chathamica from the Chatham Islands, which is sort of New Zealand way. And I hadn't appreciated, I do know that Pseudopanax have very, very tiny root balls. So if you want a tree that will grow in a pot for a long time and possibly be quite neglected, then any of the Pseudopanax are a good bet. But I didn't know that actually many of them grow as epiphytes in their native habitat. So they actually grow within other trees, and they don't actually grow, so they never really touch the ground. So they'll find some nice sort of mossy intersection between branches, seed themselves there, and off they go. So Pseudopanax chathamica is growing in my garden as a tree, but it's very slow growing. The root ball is very small, and so if you had a raised bed or a very large planter or something like that, it would be a great tree. And it's evergreen, and you get these berries that look a little bit ivy-like. They go black. They don't do anything very spectacular, but it is a good tree if you're in a very exposed location and you haven't got much ground to grow it in. And again, lots of nice sort of glossy foliage. So that's a good one.
And we should remind people who don't perchance know about how difficult your growing conditions are, that you are in a very small space and you don't have a lot of soil to speak of.
No, well, I have no ground at all, because underneath the garden is cellars, vaults. So the trees that I do have are growing in a pretty sizable raised bed. I would say it's probably 20 foot long and probably 6 foot across, but it's perfectly fine there. Obviously, if you do live by the coast, like me, then staking trees is quite important, particularly in a raised bed, because they can rock around quite easily. So that's that one. Then probably the best tree, well, definitely the prettiest tree I have in the garden and the most bulletproof is Phillyrea latifolia, which is commonly known as green olive, or I think Japanese temple tree, but I can't really recommend this highly enough, this tree, for many, many purposes. So it is, it's a tree that grows quite slowly. It has very pretty silvery bark, and it sort of tidies itself up as it grows, which is a blessing, I think, for a tree. So it's grown in Japan outside temples because it tends to cloud prune itself. So the older it becomes, the more beautiful and cloud-like the shape becomes. And ours is just starting to do it now. It's 15-ish years old, and it's starting to produce these beautiful clear branches with these nice sort of puffs of green foliage on. And if anyone wants to see a really sort of venerable one, I think there's one at Kenwood House in the walled garden, which is absolutely beautiful. But the good thing about this tree, I think, is that it's quite a good substitute for trickier evergreens. So it can be used like box for a hedge, and it can be clipped. And obviously, box has lots of foes at the moment, so it's possible substitute for that. Similarly, for something like yew, if people struggle to grow that, it could be used as a substitute. And also, it's a slightly finer thing than bay for sort of clipping into a nice like a ball, or making some topiary out of. I think it's probably, like most trees, best left to its own devices and allowed to achieve its perfect shape. I will just say, because I think people think evergreen trees don't ever drop their leaves, unfortunately, they all do, and generally at a really inconvenient time, sort of in the middle of summer. So, it's not that they don't ever drop their leaves, it's just that they always have some leaves, but it will create a bit of a mess in midsummer when all the old leaves drop off. But apart from that, hard to fault this. I think architectural plants, where mine came from, say that it's sort of indestructible. So I would highly recommend that. Do you grow that one? Do you grow that, Alan, somewhere?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I fully concur with you about leaves, because we've got the evergreen oak on either side of our gateway when you come into the house here. And in midsummer, the ground every day, sweep it and rake it every other day, it's covered with leaves, dead leaves. I don't know why, but I always have the feeling that evergreen trees take longer when they shed their leaves. They do it over a protracted period. But just, deciduous trees don't do that. They tend to go all at once, don't they?
Yeah, I think evergreen, the bay, which I'm about to show you, has been shedding its leaves seemingly forever. And they're not nice leaves either. Sort of the leaves of deciduous trees will rot down and shrivel up and make themselves small. You don't get that with evergreens. They don't rot down particularly quickly, and yes, it's just constant mess. So you have to be aware of that. I think also, I think that a lot of trees have leaves that have chemicals within them that suppress the growth of other plants. So you can't really leave them lying around, because they have an evolutionary tactic, I guess, of protecting their space by having leaves. I think beech is the main tree that does it, but the leaves of beech actually prevent other things from growing up underneath them. So yes, you have to, as Alan says, you have to constant sweeping up and clearing up exercise, unfortunately. I have so I've got this next, which is much commented on when people come and see the gardens. This is Narrowleaved Bay, Laurus nobilis angustifolia. Was at one time pretty rare, and then I think few people have got hold of it, like architectural plants, and now it's becoming a little bit more common. What is lovely about it is that it's got this much narrower leaf and a much paler leaf than bay that we're accustomed with. From a culinary point of view, you can use it in exactly the same way, but it just produces a much prettier and more delicate looking tree, and with lighter foliage, so it's not quite such a sort of solid force in the garden. Again, totally hardy here, and bears the brunt of any sort of southerly or southwesterly winds here without flinching. So very, very nice if you can track that down. And a lot of great gardens will have one of these somewhere. There must have been a point in the Victorian era where it was the must-have plant, because it seems to, occupy a prime position in places like Kew and Wakehurst and things like that. So, but a nice tree and a nice alternative to your normal bog standard bay.
When you're talking about bay trees,
yeah,
I've got the golden leaf bay in my kitchen courtyard, and it when I planted it, it didn't obviously get enough light, so it stayed green, and I thought, I've been sold a pup. Now, I first saw this tree near where Thunder used to live in Norwich. Actually, that's thought discourse. And I driving home one day, and it was lit by the winter sun, this bright golden tree, and I thought, my gosh, I've got to have that. Well, now mine has grown up out of the darkness, and it is tall, and it is absolutely lovely in the winter. It just glows. It looks beautiful.
Oh, I need to look that up, because I didn't know such a thing existed. That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it is. Brilliant.
Yeah, because there are a lot of evergreens that are very dark, aren't there? So it's like, anything that brings a bit of variety into that mix is good.
And the other thing that I noticed that with your evergreens, with the Pseudopanax and the Phillyrea, they both have they're quite dark leaves, but they're shiny, and that makes all the difference because they reflect the light and they look cheerful.
Yes.
And that's very important in the winter.
I took the dogs for a walk this morning in the wet, and in the park there was some butcher's broom, and it's such a sort of dull looking, it sort of always looks like it's on its absolute last legs. So you don't really want that, do you? You want, and no. Particularly a lot of these plants, quite good for bringing in for your festive flower arrangements and things, and you want that sort of
lift.
Nice, lift, exactly. So one last one, I promise, which is so this grows it's the only plant that really grows outside our house because we're straight onto the street. But this is Sephora. I think it's Microphylla Sun King, or just Sun King would find you it if you wanted. New Zealand shrub, I think. This has been absolutely brutalized. So the previous owners of our garage decided to cut this down. I had planted it out there, but they decided to cut it down for some reason and grind the stump out, and it came back. better than ever. And so it's very pretty, sort of leguminous foliage, I guess, which it probably is in that family. And you can see probably slightly already that those are the buds which are going to produce sort of long yellow, very elegant flowers, very, very bright yellow flowers in any time from April onwards. We had some very early last year. I'm not quite sure why, but it produces these sort of long waxy bells, which are very welcome sort of around the time that it flowers. Again, I think like all of these shrubs, probably very, very hardy in coastal areas. They may all be a little bit more borderline further up the country. This one actually, in our local park, the same place I saw the butcher's broom this morning, there is one that's tree size, which must have been planted sort of, back in the early 19th century. But it's a very nice, and you can cut this one back, you can train it against a wall. The most beautiful one I ever saw was in Hampstead, and it had been trained along a sort of scalloped iron fence, and was really quite restricted, but it looked very beautiful. So that is my last evergreen recommendation.
That's actually known in New Zealand as the kowai.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
I think. Yeah. I've got two forms of both bought as Sun King. One flowers, I think, probably 3 weeks before the other. And it also flowers with much more vigor. And I think probably it's because I chopped the one back in the front courtyard a little bit to keep it within bounds. But if you can let it go, it is a stonkingly good shrub. There's also one called Little Baby, I think, which is a prostrate growing one. So if you really haven't got much space and you want that flash of yellow in April and May, go for Little Baby.
Well, that's a good recommendation. Yes, I just love it. People will stop in the street and sort of comment on it, and of course most people aren't that familiar with it, so they can't quite place it. But not difficult to find in the garden centre, I don't think. You'll soon find it. Yeah.
To go back to Dan Cooper Garden, your exciting new venture. I mean, are you sort of waking up at night and thinking about all the things that you want to be able to share and do and pass on to, hopefully lots of new gardeners who might sort of have caught the gardening bug maybe during the pandemic and then happen upon your business, and you are kind of able to guide them a bit?
Yes, I mean it's quite overwhelming when you can't start thinking about all the things that you could do or that I would like to do, and I'm kind of having to, I'm always very like, I'll do that now, I don't like putting things off. So I am trying to keep myself within some bounds, because otherwise I'm just like, I'm like, oh, I'm over here, I'm over there. But it is really exciting. I'm going to spend, I think, the next 2 months writing the content for the site. So I'm going to try and take what I do with the Frustrated Gardener and make it a little bit more what I would call sort of evergreen. So content that will, be readable at any time of the year. So that's my immediate job, is to get that done, and obviously start sourcing all these great products, which I have to take my John Lewis hat off and put my Dan Cooper Garden hat on and start really thinking about what I'm going to start with. Things that I use myself, that I truly believe in, the secateurs that I would recommend, the gloves that I would recommend, and all of that sort of stuff. But yes, it is limitless, and very energy. Starting a new project's always very energizing, isn't it? So I'm just full of beans every day. And
I have a little tale about gardening gloves. I went to see Derry Watkins one day, and she was selling these gardening gloves, and I think they're about £6.50 a pair or £7.50 a pair. So I came home and I said to Sarah, our secretary, I said, look, I've got these gardening gloves. They came from Derry Watkins. She said, how much did you pay for those? I said, £6.50 or whatever it was. She said, straight away on the computer, oh, I can get them for £2.99. See? So we bought them for £2.99. And then a friend of mine came to the garden and said, oh, you've been to Sheringham Marketplace, I see. I said, what do you mean? Oh, she said, I got a pair of those gloves. They were 99p, weren't they?
Did you tell Derry that?
I think I may have done.
Oh, the perils of the internet and being able to look up how much something could have cost.
Well, that's true. But do you know, I used to travel a lot for work and things like that. I think for me, it's often the pure fact that you can say, I bought these gloves from, or I bought that plant from.
Exactly.
That matters massively to me. The story behind a plant, for example, that there are lots of plants you can get anywhere, but if you bought, a ginger from the National Collection of Gingers in Chichester, that's far more satisfying, isn't it? I think. I know that when it comes down to budgets, you can't always shop like that, but I do think the provenance of things and sort of the experience that you got with that is I dare say a visit to Derry Watkins is preferable to one to Sheringham Market, but I've not been to Sheringham Market, so I don't know.
No, you're quite right. And it's also, I think, it's quite freeing if you go somewhere. I went to Beth Chatto's garden and I knew that I was going to allow myself to go up and down every single corner of the nursery, and I would allow myself to buy a number of things. That you will treasure all of those plants.
Yeah, I think I try harder with plants as well that would give me. So Jimmy Blake gave me 2 plants when I visited his garden, and I feel very, very honour bound to keep those 2 plants alive. If they just come from any old garden centre, I wouldn't feel so bothered. But the fact that sort of Jimmy was kind enough to give them to me, I feel that I must keep them going. So
I feel exactly the same about a salvia. Ben Preston from York Gate in Leeds gave me a cutting of Salvia Atrocyania, which I've coveted in the garden then. He said, well, have a cutting. So I did. And when he came to the garden the following summer, he asked me specifically, where is it? I want to see it. And I think he wanted to know that I had taken care of it, not just not bothered with it. And I had taken care of it. And because it had come from York Gate as a present, I made sure that it's top of the list. I had to care for this thing, and I love it so much.
When I give people plants, I always say to them, I will never ask how this plant is. I don't want this to be a burden. Normally, they're not special things, little baby salvia royal bumbles and things. I'm like, don't worry, this isn't a burden. Just enjoy it, and hopefully it will grow. But I thought I'd done in Corbea pringlei that you gave me, Alan.
Yeah.
I was just, I wasn't sure it settled in well, and I was terrified. And then, thank goodness, it had actually. It sort of snuck behind the butylon. I hadn't noticed it.
Oh, it does that, yes. I planted one on the front of the house this year, and it was meant to go up the house wall. Instead of that, it went horizontally along, and I have a Solanum rantinetii as a standard in a pot for the summer, and suddenly flowers appeared in the Solanum, and it just went along the border and then up behind the it's intriguing.
Yeah, it went sneaking off.
It was especially when an old gentleman said to me in the garden, "I rather like that Correa. It brightens up that rather dull purple thing, doesn't it?" Dan, did you grow Salvia Atrocyania?
No, I haven't. I don't know that one. It just, the name sounds brilliant.
Well, it's like a bit like your Mexicana, but in the fact that it has the lovely bright green calyx, and again with the blue flower, and it's bone hardy in Leeds, so it'd be bone hardy everywhere, I suppose, in the British Isles. But it dies down to a whopping great tuber underneath the ground for the winters, which is really good.
Yes, that's the ones that produce tubers. The first time I grew Impatiens as like an annual, I was like, oh, what's this going on underneath? I didn't realize that they created those sort of tubers. That sort of sees them through.
The only thing you have to watch out for is the marauding mollusks in the spring, because they are very partial to salvia shoots, and actually they will trim them off before you've ever seen them, almost, and just they're about to emerge from the ground.
Yeah, I recall that happening, definitely.
Oh, this has been wonderful, Dan. A great load of show and tell. I've got so much inspiration. I think structure, evergreens, dry shade, these are all things that I am tackling in my garden, and I'm sure there are loads of people watching and listening who have exactly the same need for inspiration. So thank you, and thanks for all the wonderful stuff you do with your blog. I was reading your top dahlias of 2021 the other day. And the bow picking out your top ones, some of which, or many of which, had featured in our Dahlia podcast, which we'll make sure we link to so people can go and enjoy that one. But you're always passing on information, so I'm so excited for Dan Cooper Garden.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Yeah, I'm really excited as well. So yes, maybe if I get to come back again, I'll be able to tell you more about it.
You will definitely be back again. Before we wind things up properly, let's fit in some FLOMO, because I know we all get lots of FLOMO from your Instagram feed and your blog. This is, if you've never listened before, the spot where we share the plants that are giving us FOMO that we desperately want to grow. And we were supposed to do this podcast when the chrysanthemums were out, but time rather got away from us. So that's not going to stop me bringing chrysanthemums to the party, because I have been adoring your mums of the day on your Instagram. There were a couple that really stood out to me. Picasso, because it's basically my favorite color. So I love Dixter orange, but the older I get, the more I sort of edge towards the apricots. And you said each antique apricot flower is no bigger than a coat button, which sounded entirely adorable. So I want some Picasso in my life. And then also Vagabond Prince, which had large blossom pink flowers on long stems.
Yes, that is a really nice one. I mean, there's such, you've started me off now.
That's allowed.
Very, very overlooked flower, and obviously, potentially the next one to make a big comeback. But there are so many good ones. I've just been completely blown away this year. I've grown a lot more this year, and completely blown away by the sort of variety of different sort of flower shapes that you get, and just how useful they are. It's there aren't lots of flowers for picking at this time of year, and they are very generous in the amount of flowers they produce. You can cut a lot of chrysanthemums off a plant and it still doesn't look like you've picked any. And I think so long as you get a variety of those with bigger flowers and the little sort of flowersy ones, I think E.H. Wilson is one of my favorites, which is a sort of wild collected one, very old. But it looks like what you would find in a spring bouquet, and it really lightens up other flowers, and you don't get much of that in November. So they are absolutely worth their weight in gold, I think.
Yeah. We'll make sure we do chrysanthemums properly next year. There's always next year on the Talking Dirty podcast. Were there any you wanted to shout about, Alan, while we were on the subject of chrysanthemums?
Well, I loved the Emperor of China is my favourite one. Yeah, I love the fact that its leaves go beetroot red just as the pink flowers are opening, pale pink flowers are opening. And this year's thanks to my neglect, and I shall do it again, thanks to my neglect in staking it, because it always has not very nice legs, I'm afraid to say. It's quite a full one, about 5 feet. It's flopped over. I planted it underneath a shrub which is growing on a wall. It's flopped forward and it's covered some dying stems of species gladioli, which is good. And it's flowering, and the stems flop forward and the flowers turn upwards and look at you. And so it's lovely. It looks absolutely wonderful. So yeah, Emperor China is my favorite one, but there are masses that I really like. Another one that I really like has got those ray sort of shaped petals, quilled spoon shaped petals, and they're quite long and they hang down. And that was given to me as a little my pot mum, as a pot plant. And I hated them. And I was quite affronted that I had to be nice to this person that came to the house one day and they said, I brought you this. And I had to pretend to be pleased with it. Anyway, I thought, well, that's going in the bin. It didn't go in the bin. I actually planted it outside in the garden where I wouldn't have to look at it. I have to say. But the next year, because it had been dwarfed, it had outgrown its dwarfing hormones and it came up and it was about 1 meter tall and it looked stupendous. I've still got it today. I mean, that was a gift that I really should have been more grateful for, I think.
I'm a little concerned now that every time I knit Alan a present, he's secretly, bringing out this great act of being pleased.
It's an art.
Where are you at with your Flomo, Dan?
Well, I think Alan probably just touched on what mine is, because I think they're called fantasy chrysanthemums.
Yeah, that's right.
Ones that have these sort of absolutely ridiculous, outer petals that sort of drape down and sort of curl round like moustaches. And I think this just goes back to Alan's amazing winter garden that he's going to have. These are chrysanthemums that need a little bit of protection in order to be, truly beautiful. So I think they are generally sort of classed as greenhouse chrysanthemums. I mean, they are probably utterly sort of pointless as a garden plant, but they're probably more grown for exhibition. But I just, I guess the Japanese spent hundreds of years perfecting these marvelous creatures that need to be mollycoddled, but they are the most spectacular blooms. So that would definitely be my Flomo. I'd love some of those, and I'd love to have something to grow them in as well.
Go on then, Alan. What's your Flomo this week?
Well, they all come from today, and you wouldn't be surprised with somebody like Dan on the podcast, because I mean he's such a great plantsman, and there's 3 plants that I haven't got. Which I don't know. The third. We'll start with the third one, which is Hedychium yunnanense. Now I don't know whether I've got this or not.
Easy with 32 acres to lose.
Well, no, but the thing is, I was sorting through various gingers that I'd acquired over the years. This year, and because lots of them had lost the labels, and with 2 new dogs, one of their favourite pastime is to steal a label and then go and run away and argue over it and chew it up. So that I would like to have, so, and definitely know that I've got it. The other thing is Salvia Mexicana appeals to me greatly because it's very late, and if I ever do have that space to grow it, that it would definitely be one that I would like to grow. And the other thing that intrigues me is Impatiens balansae. I think is it Dan?
Yes, I think it's balansae or balansae. Yes,
balansae.
It's a handsome foliage plant, but I'll make sure that I send a really good photograph of it for the podcast. But yes, it's just got really quite exceptional flowers, and but you'll be able to grow that outside, no problem, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm gradually finding myself with more and more Impatiens. I mean, 3 sorts of Sardenii, one with the common one with pale mauve flowers, but one called Flash, which has got white flowers with a crimson splash in the middle. Yeah. And another one which is just a plain white one, which is a little bit boring, I suppose.
I've got one called Ravishing Ree.
Hey,
which has got sort of like a smoky pink flower. That's quite nice. You should. Yes, that's worth looking.
He's writing it down.
Oh, yeah, I know. This is terrible, isn't it? I mean, this is the older you get, the worse it becomes, I think.
I think probably Dan Cooper, Alan Gray, the Talking Dirty podcast has quite a lot to answer for the long plant wish list, the long FLOMO list that people have. And all the more so today, Dan, it has been wonderful. Even though we missed your chrysanthemums, we fitted some in and a whole lot of lovely stuff besides. And I suppose the next time we talk to you, you'll either be launching Dan Cooper Garden or in the fray of getting it off the ground. So exciting months ahead.
Yes, I'm hoping I'll have lots of exciting tulips to share with you in the spring. Lots of
nice.
Going into pots. Not quite finished yet, but getting there.
The joys of bulb planting.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, until then, until tulip time, Dan, thank you so much for a wonderful hour. We will see you soon. Happy gardening.
Happy gardening, everybody.
That's my list, because a lot of I've gone for things with like super complicated. I got them in and I was like, oh my God.
How sophisticated are you? Look, having your notepaper match your shirt.
I know. Like the most Dan thing ever.
It's dripping all over my notes now. This is a really bad thing.
What's it
It's hard
called?
to say. Asphodeline? Asphodeline?
Asphodeline. I don't
However
know.
we say it.
That funny thing with yellow flowers and stringy grey leaves.
I heard Jimmy doing a video the other day and he said, people looked up Talking Dirty and they got all kinds of filth.